Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for novices, masters, journeymen, and wardens. I am here with my fellow master, Josh.
Hello, everybody.
I am, of course, Dan. And on today's podcast, we'll be discussing all things Earthdawn, magical, quizzical, because we usually have some emails to get to today, and all things not ending in AL, but horrific. We're going to go with horrors today. So hang on for that one after we get to the horrific emails. Sorry. You have to be able to do an evil laugh when you host a podcast. It's a prerequisite requirement there.
You need it for your GM card.
You do. You have to be able to do a maniacal laugh when you GM anything. So there's the first one right there. But if you have any questions for us, we're still waiting on questions about patterns because we know that's a huge thing. I've seen some pattern questions on the Earthdawn Guild on Facebook. Josh has luckily been able to answer. But otherwise, if you have your own questions for us, because we have 3 emails to get to today, so Thank y'all. Contact us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. So with that being said, first one is
we've
from Brian.
Got a really brief email from Brian. I'll take this one. He was listening to a recent episode and was talking about PDFs because we were answering an email, I think, about PDF books. And,
yes, were there valid options versus good old-fashioned dead tree?
Yes, and mentioned lamenting tools available for like highlighting and whatnot because the full-blown Adobe program is expensive, and he just wanted to introduce Nitro PDF Reader, which is entirely free and very powerful. It includes the ability to highlight and otherwise comment on PDFs. If you are looking for a free solution, I highly recommend it. That is at gonitro.com PDF-reader. I'll drop that link in the show notes so that people can find it. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. I don't know if you have.
I glanced at it. The pro version looks absolutely fantastic. Again, that part costs money, but the first one is free, and it does the 3 things I need it to do, which he says, highlight, comment, leave notes on, and go on about your life. So
see, I'm on a Mac, so one of the PDF reader options that comes with the Mac actually has some built-in tools to highlight and stuff like that. So
fair.
I've never felt like I've been lacking at those.
No, my computer is 10 years old, and having not been furloughed, I would be looking to upgrade soon, but I've been furloughed, so I will be waiting on that for a little while. So thank you, Brian, for the helpful comment on the PDF files. I will be downloading that here probably after the show. So other than that, second email comes from Rob. Hey, folks, been meaning to email for a while, but I've had too many things going on at once and too many ideas for questions, so going to limit this a bit. And this is what he calls limiting, just to let you know. Thank you for the podcast. You are very welcome. After listening to Legends of Earthdawn, a different live play podcast that Josh is involved in, he finally got what an actual play podcast was and why it was so popular. And finally, he understood he could actually get his old gaming group together via voice over Discord, as we were always the theater of the mind group anyways, never having really used miniatures or maps. So his questions are thus. And by the way, Rob, welcome back.
Yes.
First question. When Weaponsmith was retooled in 4th edition to do more than just weapons, was there any consideration to renaming it to just Smithy or something along those lines?
No. Weaponsmith is a cool name, and there was never any consideration of changing it. No.
No.
I mean, even back in 1st edition, I mean, we talked about this on the Weaponsmith episode. Even back in 1st edition, Weaponsmith they got their armor-related stuff much later than they do now, but they did armor as well. But no, Weaponsmith is a great name. Calling it just a Smith or Smithy or something, I don't like it as much.
No.
I'm not saying that there isn't potentially another good name for it, but Weaponsmith works really well, and there's no reason to go and change that.
Yeah, even the only other thing I could think of to call it would be Blacksmith, but that's just
That's too generic.
Again, too broad, too generic, and too old-fashioned, and we're playing a fantasy game. It has to sound cool. Weaponsmith just is in that vein.
It clearly identifies what it is, but is special enough to to recognize it. Oh, this is the discipline, as opposed to the skilled or mundane smiths that you might find, which of course still exist in the setting.
Yeah. So asked and answered. Question 2, with the way folks are now doing RPGs online, like his newly reformed group, have you considered adding best practices for this into future versions of the player's guide, especially during the COVID-19 times like this? It is especially relevant, he says.
Yes, there is actually a lot of stuff that if I could go back and rework a lot of the stuff in the players and GM's guide and maybe organize it a little bit differently or something, I probably would. As I've said before, working on the players and GM's guide, I was a lot less sure of myself and was really using the 3rd edition guides as the template and everything from there. But yeah, I did some rewriting and whatnot, but I think of reorganization and really addressing some of the more present day concerns, with regards to best practices for online play and some other more practical, like game and campaign management stuff. That's actually something that sort of has been in the back of my mind. If we can maybe come up with enough stuff to justify a sort of game master focused supplement on that, with some Earthdawn focused ideas, that may be something that we work on in the future.
Fair. I just got my Mystic Paths Kickstarter book and all the supplements along with it. I did the...
You got it before I did.
Which is a miracle that I got anything before Josh did.
Well, but because we're shipping it out to all the backers, and I don't think we've given the distributor the list for all the staff copies, because generally we will pick them up at Gen Con. And as of yet, we don't know whether Gen Con is happening or not.
Good point.
So we will probably be holding off on that. But yeah, I've seen the pictures of people have been getting their shipments, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah. But I my add-on was all of the little tiny mini campaign settings.
The Legends.
Haven campaigns, the Legends. And I also got Haven. But the first one I looked at was the characters. And it's a little tiny pamphlet on how to make characters.
Yeah.
And it's a lot quicker to use that than the actual book. So
yeah, if you're making first circle characters, the character creation guidebook, which is available for free.
Yes.
At facetgames.com.
Snag that.
Basically, the rules that you need to make a first circle character.
Yeah. The only thing I noticed it was missing was the wizard spells. Other than that, everything else was in there, which is fine.
Really?
I think it might have just been, it was omitted from mine. I don't have any idea if there's a page count wrong. However, to your point, is creating all of those little tiny things to help out playing online. If we could put it out in a pamphlet just like that one.
Yeah.
I think would be awesome. And that would be the best thing I would recommend, but that's off.
One of the things actually that I have had as a possible web product, a PDF, like internet only product, is to create separate books. Like, here is a booklet for elementalists, and it contains just the talents that elementalists get, just their spells, like it contains just that information. And having one of those for each of the disciplines.
Yes.
Maybe include in that a reprint of the Adept's Way essay, which we have not reprinted in 4th edition for reasons that I've gone into before, but to have that be something that kind of is fleshed out, but then just have a booklet that is focused on that discipline with all the tools and everything that they need for it.
No, I agree. I think that would be an awesome thing to have.
And that's just a matter of finding the time to work on it.
Compile it, yes. So compilations are a thing. But yes, so he's considered it. It's been considered. Everything is in the works. Nothing is left out. Question 3. Have you considered recording a session of your convention one-shot to supplement the books in any way?
I think that's a great idea. The reality of recording at a convention...
Oh, all the background noise.
Yeah, because if you have not been to a convention, especially one the size of Gen Con or Origins, you will typically have a large hotel conference room that will have 8 or 10 tables in it, each of which at the peak times, depending on how they've organized things, can have 6 or 7 players at it. So those rooms are noisy.
You're talking 60 to 80 people in there.
Yeah. I mean, last year, for some reason, my games were the first 2 of the 3 games that I ran were like set all the way out in the butt end of nowhere compared to where the rest of the Earthdawn stuff was. And I happened to be in a room that actually only had 4 tables. And when I was running games, only one of the other tables was in use. So it was quite a bit quieter. But just in general, like if you picked up the special episode we dropped early in the feed that was the recording of our panel at Gen Con, I think recording a convention one shot or something like that would be great. I would want to get a lot more equipment to do that, like have dedicated mics and like stuff like that.
Yeah, you're talking 4 or 5 unidirectional mics or end-address mics.
Unidirectional mics or lavalier mics or something like that.
Yeah, and a whole recording board. And
you know, in order to do that. But one of the things kind of related to that is running one-shots online and recording those, similar to what we do with the Legends of Earthdawn game. And coming up here in actually just over the last week or so, I ran a one-shot for the Critshow people. Critshow is another actual play podcast. And their primary campaign, I think, is Monster of the Week is the game that they run. But they do a mini series connected to their Patreon that basically does one-shots of various games. And I actually ran a couple of sessions of Earthdawn as a one-shot game for them over the last couple of weeks that was recorded, and they are currently editing together and will make available. I think the planned release date for that is May 1st. And I think it will be like released for general consumption when that becomes available. And the adventure that I ran for them is based off one of my convention scenarios. So there will be something actually where you'll be able to hear how I run the game. And there are a bunch, you know, there's like everybody has different styles and whatnot. You will find if you listen to that, I think that I tend to play kind of fast and loose theater of the mind style. But yeah, that's something that'll be available. Fair. And possibly, depending on how things go here over the next few weeks, time permitting, I might run like another one shot or something like that we record and release.
I'm assuming that when that comes up, Josh will post that in the show notes for the show that comes up around that same time. So yes,
and
something like that.
Yeah, I'll link it in the Twitter and post it in various places if it's available. Yeah. Definitely.
So that works. Last question from Rob. And again, he was keeping it brief. Last one's a doozy for now, but you might have fun with it. He's been wondering how new disciplines get discovered or created story-wise, other than it all coming from the human journeyman types. So how far back in history do the disciplines go?
The core disciplines go back quite a ways. There's not really one firm answer to this, I don't think. There are a couple of legends that pop up in some of the first edition books talking about how, for example, the thief was the first discipline because they're the ones that stole magic from the passions to grant it to the others. There are things like that. The magic of the disciplines goes back to like the early stages of the current age of magic, and in some respects, like back to the previous age of magic before that, because you've got, you know, immortal elves and so forth that had that knowledge from before. I think it's more just a case of what happens like early on. Probably magic and disciplines were a lot more kind of open. Maybe there weren't as many people that were practicing it, but they were sort of a lot more open. And then as they taught people and traditions came to be and whatnot, they kind of got a little bit more refined and codified. So, you know, when you're talking about something that is over the course of a couple thousand years, you know, the actual origins of them are sort of lost in the mists of history. And the, you know, result is that you've got these sort of core disciplines that are iconic in their own way because of their unique takes and approaches on things. I think it's the case of people are able to do magic and start doing things with the magic and then start teaching others to do it. And that establishes traditions that basically end up eventually differentiating into the various disciplines and the paths and ideals that they follow.
Fair enough. So long time is my quick answer. Yeah. No argument with any one of those words at all. So thank you, Rob. Hopefully we answered all your questions, and feel free to contact us with any more. On to Aaron, who, by the way, slipped his email into us here at the last minute, literally before we started recording. So I'm going to read all of Aaron's emails so we can kill some time. Hi, all. I'm far from new to this game. I began playing Earthdawn when I was around 11 or 12, having dipped my toes into the RPG pool when he had showed some interest, and his uncle invited him along to play in his D&D and RuneQuest groups. It was in these groups that several of the guys really took me under their wing, and seeing my enjoyment and dedication to the characters and games, the GM of the Earthdawn group that was being run at the time invited me along to play in his group too, so to this day I have never looked back. Good on you. The depth of story and design, in Aaron's opinion, has no equal, and he can say with absolute honesty that if he could only play one game from this day on, it would always be Earthdawn. And we're done recording the podcast. From now, we're going to end on a high note. I'm just kidding. Having played on and off since the 90s through 3 editions of the game, he is unfortunately now without a GM, so he's taken on the role in his own small group, if anything, just to lose himself back into this world again of Barsave. So as a bit of a refresher, he began listening to the Legends of Earthdawn podcast. We have no problem giving them a shout out in any way, shape, or form. Thoroughly enjoyed that, by the way, and he is hoping for more installments soon, and has now discovered our podcast, the Earthdawn Survival Guide, which has soon made him realize that there is so much more to the world of Earthdawn than he ever knew after 20 years of play. So, his questions are as follows. 1. What source books of any editions would you consider to be must-haves for a successful game master?
Okay, obviously setting aside the rule books, the player's guide and the GM's guide, which you kind of need. I would say
big duh.
Probably the ones that I always recommend whenever somebody's looking to get into the game or trying to get more. The name givers or denizens of Earthdawn books, depending on which edition you're talking about. It's called Denizens of Earthdawn in 1st edition, Name Givers of Barsave in 3rd edition. They more or less contain the same information. These are largely just in-character essays about the various races and provide a lot of kind of useful setting information about them. The Adept's Way, which we've kind of talked about a little bit here when we've done our deep dive into the various disciplines. Those essays really do a good job of emphasizing how following a discipline is a special philosophical thing. It's not just a job that you do.
Way of life. Yeah.
The original Barsave box set, the campaign guide in that gives a really nice broad overview, although a lot of that information is more or less included in the 4th edition GM's guide. Although there is some additional stuff in there that you might find good. It's also written in setting, so there's some stuff there. And then the Serpent River book, if you're looking for something that kind of more like setting info, the Serpent River book is fantastic because it gives you a really good overview of the province as a whole and important places, not just the Tiskrang's role in it, but also gives little bits of information about some other locations. The Thrall source book, when we kind of talked about our Thrall episode here a few weeks back, that's a fantastic book to get because Thrall is really important to the setting in one way or another. Even if you're not necessarily going to be playing in Thrall a lot, your game is likely to involve them at some point. So those are sort of my top choices. And then at that point, it's kind of a matter of what you're looking for. The Creatures of Barsave, the 1st edition book, is a nice read, in terms of the sort of in-character, like, the commentary by a dragon about these various creatures that he's describing. The creatures are something of a mixed bag here and there, and obviously the 1st edition book isn't really going to help you in terms of the up-to-date mechanics, although we've provided the ones that we thought were good in the various books so far. But the in-character stuff from the dragon is a fun read, but I wouldn't say that that's necessary. The Horrors book is a really good read. Again, the mechanics in it from the 1st edition aren't great, and I'm kind of sorry that we haven't had an opportunity to reprint that stuff for 4th edition yet. But just some of the creepy, like really good writing that is in that book and how it shows a bunch of different kinds of horrors and things like that.
And how nasty they are.
It's how nasty they are and some ideas of stuff that you can do with them. And then at that point, you're looking at like setting books. Is your game going to be dealing, are you going to be going up to Parlength? Then look at the Parlength box. Are you going to be dealing
same thing?
and the Kratos book or the Travar book or the Iopos book, which is on Kickstarter now.
Shameless plug.
But yeah, you just like pick up books that, grab books that you think will, are helpful for the area that you're going to set your game in. And just kind of go from there.
I only have one to add out of the entire list, which is eventually, as your players or yourself get past 5th, 6th circle, you're going to want to pick up the Earthdawn Companion because that's circles 9 and higher. And I consider that a rule book along the line of the players or GM's guide. It's not something that's necessary like right out of the gate, but it does have some useful stuff when it comes to like knacks and
The enchanting rules can be useful if you've got somebody in your group who's going to be interested in that. Masks are really helpful, even starting out in terms of providing a little bit of variety to creatures and so forth. So there's some useful stuff in the 4th edition companion that's good even for a relatively novice person. It just doesn't have a lot of like good setting source book material in it.
Yeah. So, like I said, I don't disagree with anything Josh said. It just, we didn't name the companion by title. Other than that, yeah, I can't see anything different to add. So,
Questors, the Questors
I'm not going to
book.
Disagree. I'm certainly not going to disagree. I wrote 2 of the essays in there, so I'm not going to disagree.
The Questors book, the new Mystic Paths book, which is in distribution now. Both of those
I literally have a very that for 4 days. So
yeah, have a very similar like setup, intentionally so, to the Adept's Way in terms of providing in-character points of view for these types of characters. So those are also good ones to look at if those are areas.
Yeah. And if you want to get really intricate, you can pick up the Orcs of Kara. You can pick up Karafad. You can pick up the Sky
Crystal Raiders of Barsave. Yeah. Then, those are like setting books. If you're you might have to do a little bit of work to sort of adapt them, but you can always pick up older adventures. As Dan says, he runs pre-published stuff all the time. Might take a little bit of work to update it to 4th edition. We've got the Legends of Barsave adventure series, which has 7 chapters released and the 8th sitting on my computer just waiting for me to select some art to drop into it. So that'll be out here relatively shortly as of the time of this recording. I certainly hope to have that done before the Kickstarter for Iopos ends. So there is, even if you're not necessarily certain of your skills as a game master, or especially if, like, when it comes to writing your own adventures, there is a wealth of information to draw from and expand on from that.
Totally. And I think 1 or 2 episodes ago, we actually dropped some of those in there as well. So by all means, if that does not satisfy you as to must-haves, then go get it all. Question number 2. Any tips for an aspiring game master on keeping players focused on the game and not on any real-life chatter? I think you and I covered this a while ago.
I feel like this was a question. Yeah, I forget what episode it was, but there was an earlier episode with emails where we related. I talked about, because I know I talked about my buddy who was running a game and had the focus stone.
Yes,
that he would hold up to his forehead when things would get a little bit out of control.
I want to say it was in our first 10. Somewhere in the because this is 22 now, so
we're now in the 20s. We're now in the 20s.
I can't remember the first 10 years anyway. First 10 episodes.
So we did kind of address that. It's
somewhere.
That's something that you'll just
if you find the podcast. Josh probably has it in the show notes. He's very detailed about the show notes. Find which episode it is and just listen to that one because I'm pretty darn sure we've covered that one before. But otherwise, it's just a matter of there is social activity, so there is going to be perhaps some like socialization, especially if you're playing with like friends, especially if it's a game that like you've been doing other games and stuff together. Yeah. As opposed to a more professional or semi-pro actual play thing. Like the Legends of Earthdawn, the actual play podcast that I'm in, we're all friends. Yeah. Mostly. Like we all know each other. We kind of know each other from conventions and whatnot. And so we're all kind of friendly and get along well and so forth, which is why the game has managed to go on as long as it is. Yeah. But there is kind of an understanding that, we've only got so much time to record, and play. And so when we get into that, we do try and focus. And that's just a matter of, getting a feel for how your group handles it. And as the game master, as the sort of manager of the situation, it does behoove you, and maybe, have that as a discussion among the group as well, to just try and keep things on track, especially if it's a little bit tougher sometimes to keep things focused when you're online, because there are so many other distractions and you can't, if you're playing over Discord or some other platform like that, it's very difficult to say, well, you can't have the internet. Well, you need the internet to play the game. Absolutely. And to the previous emailer, Rob, who just got his group together after he realized you can play online like we do, perhaps maybe you say, okay, we'll all log in at the top of the hour. You got 10 minutes to get your real life chat out of the way. But, quarter after, dice are rolling. Here we go. And maybe get some... I don't know. Maybe
and then schedule schedule planned breaks.
Yeah.
Like if you've got a 3-hour session, like maybe plan it so that you're going to have like, we're going to take a break like an hour and a half or an hour 20 or an hour 40 in, depending on how things are going, to give people a chance to step away from the computer or like fill up their drinks or whatever. Because, you know, if somebody, you know, needs to run into the kitchen and whatnot, you know, yeah. You know, unlike when you're sort of sitting around at home and somebody goes into the kitchen and you can usually just yell if you need to get their attention. That's not going to work so well in an online game.
No, I play 5 hours every other Sunday, and we always, if there's a break coming up, we're like, okay, let's not do combat just yet. So when we come back, roll initiative, and that's pretty much where we say, okay, this is where we're just going to stop the story, take 5 minutes, come back, whatever. So. Things like that. And
with the game that's going to be that I did with the Critshow folks, like we sort of intentionally like broke up our recording where it's like, oh, this is a really good like story beat to like end that episode on, and so we'll stop there and we'll take a few minutes and then we'll come back and we'll pick up, kind of thing. So
cliffhanger.
You know, depending on how structured your games are, and as a newer GM, like we were talking the other week, a little bit more structure is perhaps better when you're starting out and the group may not have as much direction in terms of what they want to do.
Yes.
If you've got a more structured storyline, then maybe kind of plan things to have breaks at the appropriate moments.
Yeah. So his final question is, again, he said, thanks for the podcast. We absolutely, Aaron, love putting a podcast on. I look forward to this every 2 weeks or so. His third question is, he would love to play again, but currently there are no groups locally, so he would need to consider online gaming, which we just briefly touched on. However, being based in the UK, the game times can be an issue. Do you know of any groups looking for experienced players, and if so, where he might find one? And I believe the introduction to episode 21 last time, Josh laid this out exactly. So feel free to reiterate.
Yes. Josh. So to reiterate, there are a couple of different ways. One, if you are not already on Discord, get on Discord and find the FASA official Discord channel. I put links in the show notes every week, so you can go right to it. There are players there, people, you know, potentially putting together. I know we've got folks from Europe and whatnot there, so the time issue might not be so much of a concern. Yeah. There's also the West Marches style game, which is run out of the FASA Games forums, and that is a much more sort of freeform, more player driven. Like you decide, like some players get together and decide what they want to have happen, and there are like multiple GMs, and you just kind of work with players and the GMs to work out a time, and it's not a long-term commitment. Like where you need to know that you're going to be meeting every week. You can go, oh, hey, I want to play, and, you know, we're going to get this group of characters together, and we're going to go and we're going to investigate the rumors of this abandoned temple, and this GM is going to run for us, and we're going to run at such and such a time. And so the times are flexible, and the player group is kind of a potential sort of like drop in or catch as catch can. So check out the forums. There's all sorts of information on that there. Under the Earthdawn section, online play, West Marches 2, because it's sort of the second iteration of that. They've made some refinements and whatnot from the previous version. But yeah, they're always happy to allow people in. So check that out.
The lovely thing about Earthdawn is we're always welcoming, I think, is the best.
Well, hey, you know, the best game that nobody plays. We want to get more people playing it.
Absolutely.
And I want
really,
I don't want to say nobody plays it, because obviously people do.
Yes, we have a small base of
listeners. But it is one of those things that the people who know about it love it and want to play it more, and the people who have not heard about it should hear about it so that they can love it and play it more.
Absolutely. And eventually we'll overtake D&D, period, as the first game people think of when they talk about a role-playing game. So, yeah.
Well, we need like Hasbro level money before we can do that, unfortunately.
Word of mouth, man. Power to the people. So that kind of wraps up our email for the day. This is about half the episode. So if you've hung on this long, we're going to get to the fun stuff now. And we get to talk about the nasty things that crawl under your bed and get inside your head at a distance or up close. Those foul things that... Yeah.
Like the reason the whole setting is the way that it is.
Yes. Welcome to our small discussion about the horrors.
The horrors.
Where do you want to start? Because it's so many places to choose from to start. I love the fact that the horrors actually are even in a setting like this, because it's been pointed out earlier and we've dismissed it a little bit because they've been called by other reviewers as Lovecraftian type beasties. And I know we've refuted that to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But they are in and of themselves both an astral entity and a physical entity. And so I think that takes them up a notch as far as where they can hurt you and how they can get to you, as far as not just, oh, it's a big bad thing, I kill it and I move on because it's done now. No, they might be able to retreat into astral space and come back later. So
yeah, the horrors are an opportunity for a GM to bring in whatever kind of weirdness that they want. Yeah. Like a lot of the more traditional creatures in Earthdawn have a reality within the setting. They have a ecology to a certain extent. Like they sort of have a supported existence as a thing that makes sense that it would within the structure of the ecology and the environment of Earthdawn. You can
classify them. You can classify most of the other beasties as reptilian or avian or mammalian.
Right. I mean, they'll have special powers. You'll have some of the iconic creatures like manticores or unicorns or harpies. Some of them have, twists on them. Many times these twists are the result of the working of the horrors and the effects of the scourge. You have some like strange creatures like the Genus, who for some reason is normally like it's a placid plant eating
ever.
Yeah, like the adult is a placid vegetarian, but the
offspring,
the young, the newborns are these small. Like I think when I think of the Genus, they're not actually depicted this way, but what I think of are the critters from the movie of the same name, which is to say these small little things that just like destroy and devour everything around them. So you've got like a lot of normal creatures like that, but the horrors are the way that you can bring in what in D&D would be your demons and devils or other kind of strange, like extraplanar beings.
Yeah, your Stephen King nasties, your Clive Barker nasties, whatever you've seen in a horror film amped up to the nth degree. Not only physically, but what they can, what powers they bring to it, what magic they bring to it, and what kind of level of corruption and evil. And I do mean capital EVIL, evil, to whatever game you want to get in. So it's... yeah, if you've had enough of your players, whip out a horror on them. Okay, make new characters.
The horrors are, generally speaking, powerful, dangerous, and if you, as a GM, are not careful with them, it is very possible to, wipe a party. Yeah, to wipe your character,
total party
your player
kill.
Character group with a horror. If you just take a look at some of the examples that are in the 4th edition books, the GM's Guide and the Companion, some of the powers and difficulty numbers in terms of their defense ratings and the multiple powers and the, never mind the ability that some of them have to spend karma on anything. And those karma steps are much higher than you get as a player character. This is a horror that has a karma step of 8, which means if it spends a point of karma, it's rolling an additional 2d6 on top of its already like step 18 spellcasting. It is very possible to, if you are going into a knockdown drag out with a horror, to kill people easily. And that's frankly as it should be.
Yes.
Because
they're not to be trifled with.
I mean, the world hid away from them for 400 years. The dragons, dragons prefer not to mess with them. The immortals, immortal elves who have, are aware of this and whatnot, do not mess around with these things. They certainly, the more powerful ones should be absolutely terrifying, pants-wetting,
There is Vergigorm, the hunter of great dragons. Yeah. Okay, that title alone should tell you he's taken out great dragons and he's still here. So
he has not been seen in this, and he has not been reliably seen. There are a lot of cultists who follow him, but he has not been reliably
Yes.
cited or reported in the most recent Scourge.
So yeah, it's. I mean, we've said before
But
that the dragons in Earthdawn are more powerful than the dragons in D&D. A, B. That was right there. So that's I'm going to make that 2 points. And then third point is if there are horrors that can take out dragons, plural. That's how big and bad these guys are.
Well, then you've got critters like Bualgathor,
yes,
who is a horror that hunts other horrors.
Mm-hmm. Because again,
yeah, like basically the horrors are a way that you can bring any kind of bizarre magical weirdness into your game. They are entities from the depths of astral space. They are highly magical. Mm-hmm. Certainly the more powerful ones are. Yes. And so consequently can have whatever kind of bizarre powers and abilities that you want.
Justified if they're not already in the game. Not. And there's a plethora, good word for the day, of powers that horrors can have. If they're not in there, make one up, because trust me, this is not the end-all, be-all of what the horrors can be composed of. And they can raise the dead. They can control the dead. They can mark you as their puppet that they can just drop in and say, hey, how you doing? I remember reading The Longing Ring with Jirol, the Honorable Thief, in there, and he was already, I think on page 3, corrupted by a horror, so he couldn't even talk without gibberish coming out of his mouth and letting everybody know he was tainted. And so he was
if you haven't read the novel, but you have the GM's guide, look up the Despair Thought, which is one of the horrors. That's the horror that Jirol was marked by. Mm-hmm. And what it does. And like those first novels are like dark.
They're on my rereading list this summer, I believe. I'm going to get to the original trilogy again.
But like if you have not read The Longing Ring, it is really good. It is worth reading, but content warning for severe depression and suicidal thoughts.
That's what Despair Thought does. As a whole.
Yeah, like And that is, I think, potentially one of the pitfalls or drawbacks or problems with having a horror in your game. It is very easy to have a horror just be it is a more powerful monster that has some weird powers, and can sometimes be difficult to really convey in a game. And this is true of any kind of horror genre style gaming, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But it can be very difficult to present to the players, to the characters, the true depravity or darkness or evil, as you put it, of what the horrors can do. And so if you're if you're looking to bring horrors and like horror themed gaming into Earthdawn, which is perfectly valid and awesome, and the game that I ran for the Critshow folks is a horror game, definitely look at resources that are online for running those types of games. Mm-hmm. But the problem that you can run into, for example, the Despair Thought, the way that it works is it hides its physical body away somewhere far away, because it's not really physically particularly potent, but its magical abilities have a fairly long range. It convinces someone to perform this ritual to mark a loved one, and then it basically lives in that person, astrally sort of lives in that person's head, and can talk to them and torments them and tells them that they're worthless, and like does all kinds of like abusive, like emotionally abusive, manipulative stuff to basically try and get them into a severe depression and have them kill themselves. Like, and the horror feeds off of that. Mm-hmm. It can be very, like, when you've got a power like that, it is very difficult to have that kind of power affect a player character. Yeah. Just in terms of like how you manage that. That is one of those things that you really need to work on ahead of time. It works fantastically for the point of view character in a novel. Yeah, because you can lay that groundwork. But when you're, a lot of times what you can end up, what works better perhaps if you're not as like on point with your group or as comfortable as having that really kind of personal horror level of like inflicting these things on your player characters, to see how that affects the people or the effects that the horrors have had in other places, and to try and evoke that sense of dread or horror or fear that can come about. In the Legends of Earthdawn game, which the episodes that are going on right now, that are being released right now, are set in par-length and ones that we recorded several months ago. But in the current time, we are a little bit further forward and actually like trying to track down and kill a horror. And I am not sure, like as a player, as someone who is pretty familiar with the system, I'm not sure if we are going to I'm not sure if we are going to survive this. The stuff that we have run into thus far, just some of its minions and constructs and things like that, have caused us some problems. And I'm not sure whether all of us are going to survive. I'm not sure whether any of us are going to survive. And on the one hand, like as a player, that is a certain amount of tension
and trepidation,
and a certain amount of trepidation and fear, because I like this game. I like these characters, both my own and the others that I'm playing with.
Yes.
But like, what is the effect that is like, already people who've been listening will know that our game is haunted by the death of one of the original player characters that was in there, Feindar, who was an elf air sailor, was killed like early on in the campaign, and Scratch the Orc Troubadour has taken up his sword in the aftermath of that, and is kind of part of the reason that we are dedicated eventually to gaining the power necessary to free the care of Synok.
Yeah.
And we're in our actual like current, as we're playing, we are back at the care, and I don't know how this is going to turn out, which is, you know, again, like a great feeling,
it
but
should be. It should be that the horrors cause that kind of dread, trepidation, preparedness, and I can't call it fear, but hesitancy to even try. Because it's not like in D&D where I'm going to go, hunt down a dragon. Yeah, they're a dime a dozen, 9 times out of 10 in D&D. In Earthdawn, dragons are to be feared as well, because as Josh pointed out in earlier episodes, they're not nice. But horrors are, level 50 compared to, most of the things you're going to encounter.
Yeah, we've talked kind of a lot about the horrors as like dealing with the real kind of like emotional horror and the things that they can do as far as manipulating or trying to get people to do nasty things to each other and whatnot. That is not the only thing that you can have the horrors. If you want to run a game that's a little bit more heroic and adventurous and less tinged with horror genre flavor stuff, it is perfectly fine to run the horrors as just nasty, bizarre, tough creatures that you can, you've got stuff like the Gnashers, which are just like big slavering monsters that eat whatever they come across, and those are, great to go up against.
Yes, and any army of false men as well.
Yeah, talking about like par-length and the horror minions and so forth, you can have a game that is very influenced by the horrors and what they have done without even actually having a horror appear, if that's the case. But if you want to go that route, definitely look into resources that are out for other horror games, and the GM advice and the discussion and stuff that goes along with them. One actually that is really, really good, the Fate system from Evil Hat has a Fate horror toolkit, which, while all of the mechanics in it are geared toward Fate, has a lot of really good discussion about various dials and various things that you can do in a horror genre game. A lot of the advice in that is totally applicable to Earthdawn in terms of how you want to manage that with your group. Another resource, I have no idea whether it's actually still available. I picked this up back in the 90s. It was a book put out by Iron Crown Enterprises, to the original people who did the Middle Earth role-playing game. To give you an idea of how long ago this was, they are like long out of business. There's a book called Nightmares of Mine, which has a lot of stuff about horror gaming. look at stuff like Unknown Armies or Delta Green, both of which are modern day horror games, but can have a lot of helpful sort of advice about running that type of game. Obviously, the World of Darkness games, the White Wolf stuff are now through Onyx Path. Some of those are really good. Changeling the Lost, especially, can have a very, like, the Fae in that can be very kind of high level horror, manipulative entities kind of thing. So there's kind of some inspiration you can take there. Mm-hmm. Stephen King, my neighbor a couple of blocks over, did a nonfiction book called Danse Macabre, which is like an analysis and overview of horror fiction movies and books and things like that. But it also has a lot of really good stuff to say about sort of horror as a genre, and its strengths and things like that.
Yeah.
Which then can point you to a whole lot of classic horror. I mean, was released in the 80s, so it doesn't include anything from like the past, 30 years, but it still has a lot of
30 years. Yeah.
Like really good pointers to some classics of the genre in film and television to a lesser extent, and books as well. And the horrors source book from first edition, which we mentioned earlier.
Totally.
The essays in there, can give you a lot of stuff. But yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with
and let's not just forget, since we mentioned Lovecraftian at the beginning of the segment, the Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, Call of Cthulhu.
Game.
There's
also not a bad call.
Yeah.
And then an offshoot of that by a completely different gaming company at all is Cthulhu Tech.
Right.
As well.
Yeah. I mean, Cthulhu, because Lovecraft's stuff itself is public domain, the copyrights on them have expired. Like Cthulhu mythos related stuff, like Delta Green is a Cthulhu game. It's an offshoot of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
But there's there's some inspiration in terms of strange creatures that you can get from that as well. Again, the themes of Lovecraft's work are a little bit different than what you would find in Earthdawn, but there's still inspiration certainly that you can take from just Lovecraft has some issues when it comes to his like personal feelings on stuff. That has been well hashed out elsewhere. But his prose in terms of showing things without showing things.
And the effect the supernatural would have on
the effects that can have on normal people can definitely be something that's inspirational. Edgar Allan Poe, some of the stuff that you can get with him. I mean,
Clive Barker in the Hellraiser series.
Clive Barker.
Because again,
Hellraiser or Cabal, which was made into the movie Nightbreed, which is incredibly underrated of his stuff, I think. Aberrat, which is a more young adult thing, is less explicitly horror, but still has a lot of the Clive Barker weirdness to it. Is good. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can take inspiration from.
Yeah, because remember the overall arc of the horrors is they don't eat like everybody else does. They feed on your pain and your despair and your emotions.
Yeah. Even the simpler slavering monster horrors in fourth edition, we kind of developed and show that while the Nashers really are just eating stuff, they regain karma through the pain that they are inflicting on those that they are devouring.
Yeah.
And so there is some of that. But yeah, so you've got like the horrors themselves looking at the effects that they have on the world and the people. And, when you are diving into an abandoned or forgotten care, you're like the characters are entering into it, potentially exploring a horror story.
Yes.
And the things that people might have done or had done to them as a result of the influence of these entities or out of fear of these entities and things like that. It's just,
Yeah, they are the boogeyman. They're the ghost story. They're the things that frighten everybody, including the stoutest troll and occasionally dragons themselves.
And dragons themselves, yes.
Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend your first or even second or even third campaign involve a major horror. Minor ones, sure, along the way, just to remind you, there's other things out there that are worse than just politics as usual or whatnot, the occasional bad guy or greedy soul. But eventually, yeah, just touch on them a little bit or start lacing in little clues about which horror is behind the scenes on this one and which horror is behind the scenes in this adventure. Something along those lines, because they are so permeating the realm in the game of Earthdawn that you're doing a disservice if you don't include them at some point.
Because right. At least to some extent to acknowledge the existence and the tremendous effect that they had on the world. I mean, everything in the Earthdawn setting, I mean, we in our sort of timeline retrospective, there was a lot of like politics and whatnot that was involved in terms of the relationships between Thrall and Thera and whatnot. But all of that, I mean, the founding of Thera itself and everything that developed from that is as a result of knowing that the horrors were coming and what was done in order to prepare the world and for their coming and to survive. Yeah. And now in the aftermath of most of them are gone, not all of them. But there are still some in place, and their legacy will echo on for many, many years to come. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we've referred to it as a post-apocalyptic. Well, the apocalypse was the horrors. That was the thing. They absolutely ravaged the earth astrally, physically, and left their imprint on it to a huge degree. And so you need to include them at some point. They just have to be there at some point. And to kind of get back to what we started off with, the idea of the horrors supposed to be like powerful and dangerous and scary, and the attributes and stats and game mechanics for them tend to be elevated. Very high. Yeah. One of the things to look at at the beginning of the creatures chapter of the GM's guide are guidelines on like gauging the difficulty of an encounter. Mm-hmm. Those are really good things to look at in terms of getting a sense of, is this a horror that is going to be a difficult fight? Is this going to be just a pushover? Or like, is the horror going to completely mop the floor with them? And then what I tend to do is use the karma that they have. Like, I will tend to, when I'm like, if I'm custom statting a horror, which is what I usually do, because I will. Well, I mean, I always think that if you're going to be doing like a powerful opponent or a like campaign level opponent or a story arc focused like ultimate antagonist, you're better creating, like, I will take as the initial starting point, like, I'll go, okay, I'll use the stat block from this and then tweak the numbers based on what I know the characters are to like fit, to fit the appropriate power level, kind of using those guidelines from the GM's guide. But just to like take a look at that and have a sense of where things are going to end up. And then I will use the karma as like, if for some reason the horror's dice rolls have not been going so well for it, or if I want to make an early impression, I will use karma more as a spice than as something that they will go throwing in at every opportunity. Unless obviously, the player characters were prepared and ready and seem to be powerful enough that the horror is going to basically go all out to try and survive, because nothing makes a powerful extra-dimensional entity, immortal, powerful extra-dimensional entity afraid than the possibility that it might get cacked by a bunch of puny mortals. Yes. So a handful. Definitely like horrors as major story arc opponents, as campaign level opponents. That can be tough because we've talked about the difficulty of long-term play and how long it can take to progress to the point, if you're starting with new characters, to progress to the point where they could actually take on a horror. Look at Blades. We've mentioned Blades on the on the show before. That adventure collection, which follows the story arc of a group that fell prey to a horror, and how the player character group kind of gets involved in that, and then goes and squares off against the horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Every single time I've thrown, because I've run the pre-gen adventures, everything's pre-published and someone else has already figured out most of the mechanics for and the storyline for. I have run every single one of most of those actually have a horror involved in some regard, which has always been fun. So I've had many people play a horror stalker on purpose once they join the game, but almost every single time they actually get to the horror listed in the description, somebody ends up well below their unconsciousness rating and sometimes past their death rating, if not two of them. So they're not to be trifled with, and I don't pull punches when I say, okay, guys, I've been pulling punches maybe up until now, but this is the horror. It's not pulling any punches. So make sure you're prepared.
Interestingly enough, as the exception, Infected does not include a horror.
I did run that was fun.
There is a horror cursed item that is present in it that one of the NPCs has. The Skull of Marburg.
Yep.
And a lot of what is going on at the village that is the focus of the adventure events is because of fear of the horrors.
Yes.
That they are afraid that what is going on here is because of a horror. Although, spoiler alert, it is not a horror. It is something else.
Yes.
But Mists of Betrayal, Terror in the Skies, those both have horrors. Shattered Pattern.
Yep.
Does not feature a horror specifically, but does, like, the main antagonist in that is a cultist of
a horror.
Vertigorm, I believe.
Think so.
Blades, obviously, we just mentioned.
I just ran Kept in the Dark. That is in there as well.
That's one of the Thrall adventures, I think, that features a horror in it.
You are correct. And I ran one that was published in, I think, Pyramid Magazine way back in the 90s called By the Book, and that horror was called The Unnamer.
Yep.
Which
is a horror that's in, if I recall that adventure correctly, is in, like, infecting books in the Great Library.
You are correct. You are absolutely correct. I did that one on purpose. We had gone through, this is a small little off story, we had gone through the Earthdawn Companion first edition and made up a couple of disciplines of our own that were not listed in the original first edition books. And so we tried the talent progression as much as we possibly could to follow the rules. It was a little broken, power dynamic was a problem there. So the Unnamer unwove their talents, and they had to go back and spend the legend points to relearn them in the now correct, air quotes, now correct order. And so I used the Unnamer to fix a talent progression for disciplines that we had created from scratch. So that was my ingenious, I don't know, plan to use the Unnamer for my own purposes to go re-break the characters and make them properly again. So...
Yeah.
But yes, almost every one I've run has some element of the horrors in it on purpose. So when you do that, when you introduce the horrors properly, it will have a wonderful effect on your players. They should have some trepidation. They should not go in wading knee deep singing "It's a Small World After All" like a happy-go-lucky person and go, "I'm going to take on the horror." Yeah. You do that.
And you can really set that by showing what effect the horror has had on other people
and the landscape
and the landscape. Yeah, absolutely. So
they're big bad nasties. Any favorite horrors? Any final thoughts? Anything we haven't touched on?
I love Earthgrath. Earthgrath is like the nasty, jilted stalker boyfriend.
Fair.
Just like Earthgrath's entry in the horrors book is just gives me shivers every time. He's awesome.
Fair.
The other one that I really like is one that has not seen print yet. It was the horror that I created as the campaign level opponent for one of my first long-term games.
Nice.
The Dreamstalker, who I didn't even really create stats for early on. That just basically he would show up and mess with the group. I did an entire session that was basically him having trapped them in a dreamscape, and they didn't realize it at first. And then when they figured it out and kind of woke up from what was going on, like from then on, like any time that things started to get weird, they would reference that initial dream and just check to see if like is there a sun in the sky? Like, little surrealisms like that.
Yeah.
So I really like him, and so Earthgrath for published, Dreamstalker, my own creation, obviously for unpublished stuff that may one day see print. If I can write something up and come up with a good stat block for him.
Fair. Yeah. I'm not that creative to create my own horror at the moment, guys. Vergigorm being on the cover of the horrors book and the color plate page that was put into... Vergigorm's on the cover, isn't he?
I'm not sure. Hold on.
Original first edition horrors book.
No, actually, the art that's on the cover of the first edition Earthdawn book is also in one of the color plates inside, and it's labeled as Taint.
Right. Yeah, the other color plate for Vergigorm is...
Yeah, Vergigorm's color plate is a couple later, and is also like...
badass.
It's very similar in that it's all like multiple eyes and insectile like weirdness.
Yeah, he just looks vicious. And I can't think of a better word to describe that than that.
Well,
so those are my two favorites, just based upon looks. Because you whip that picture, this is what you see, and people run screaming. So
the stat block for Vergigorm in the first edition book, his base attribute steps are in the mid 30s to 40.
Yes,
like those are his attribute steps, and then he's got spell casting and attack like higher than that.
Yeah.
On top of it, and like a death rating of like 200. And
legend points are like in the millions or something. 1 point something million. So yeah, I just look at his stat block and go, I just ignore the first 20 some odd steps. Ignore them. I'm rolling multiple dice all over the place. So and the fact that he is the big bad mamma jamma on the block. So he's just my favorite, not because he is the big bad mamma jamma. He just looks evil. He looks cool. That painting is fantastic. And his stat blocks, you're like, oh my, pretty much go there. So that's how this game can be is, you want to mess with the big guy? Let's go mess with the big guy. So I like those. And the painting of Taint on the front of the book is just, I can stare at that for a while. Okay. So those are mine. Anyway, that should do us. We've kind of eclipsed an hour or so. If you have any questions on horrors, any final thoughts, Josh? Anything we missed? How's that? We got to get a nice broad overview of the horrors and where you can draw from. Yeah,
the purpose that they can serve, the common pitfalls and problems that you might run into with them. Yeah, I think we covered things pretty well.
Yeah, fair enough.
We'll close the book of forbidden knowledge on that one.
My only movie reference that I have that I don't think we mentioned at all was Event Horizon.
Great film.
I think that has an element of the horrors to it.
Oh, absolutely! Like, yeah. The first 2/3 of that movie is fantastic in terms of building atmosphere. Like, I mean, it's sci-fi, but that like the ship and everything related to that, that's a care. Like, that's a care dive.
That's exactly what I was expecting it to be. And so that's why I watched the movie. And it scared the Vergigorm out of me.
The tail end, I don't feel that it quite sticks the landing. But I mean, it's still really, really good. And Sam Neill is fantastic as always.
Oh, always, yes.
If you want to talk about another good Sam Neill flick, John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness.
Oh, there you go.
Is also another good one that has... It's again a kind of a bit more Lovecraftian, but definitely has a lot of like weird like main characters starting to not trust himself because of weirdness that could be definitely like a horror tainted or horror corrupted item and individual.
Yeah.
So that's another really good one. And there is that scene where he's like running down the tunnel and all you get are these glimpses of this like bizarre squamous tentacled something behind him.
Tentacles are just spooky. So no, there's plenty of pop culture to draw from, and my other game masters who also have run Earthdawn tend to watch a horror flick or 2 or 3 a couple of days before they start running Earthdawn to get in that vein of I'm throwing a big bad nasty at you.
The original Hellraiser and Hellraiser 2 actually have quite a bit of horror as in like very appropriate type of Earthdawn type horror to them.
Mm-hmm.
The later entries in the series get a little dumb, but that's a failing of most horror franchises.
Sequels.
But the first two are like, you know, basically before they turned Pinhead into the star, the first two are like really, you know, again, it's like Clive Barker. Like it's right up the alley for horror. Okay, we're just talking about how awesome various horror media is. So we'll
because we can get into that vein for a while, but it's okay. So by all means, we're not going to stop talking about this, because on the next episode, we're going to start talking about parlays.
Yes.
And by the time you listen to this one, that one will have been recorded, so you can't actually email us unless it's after the fact.
But if you do want to email us, whether with questions about managing horrors in your game, or you want to tell us a cool story about a horror that you had in your game or something along those lines, you can...
Oh, we love the stories.
We love the stories. You can write us edsgpodcast@gmail.com.
Give us the stories. Absolutely. And otherwise, Josh, thanks for making the time.
Thank you.
Oh, by all means, follow Josh on Twitter, on Discord, find the Earthdawn Guild on Facebook, like, share, and subscribe. And by all means, spread the word as much as you possibly can, just shy of skywriting and, you know, going out in public and shaking people's hands.
Yeah, well, right now you don't want to do that. But also, again, as of this recording and release, the Kickstarter for Iopos Lair of Deceit is still running. We blew through our initial goal. We are, as of right now, over 15,000. Hold on, just refreshing my page here. We're at about 17,000 of our goal, so we have definitely achieved that,
surpassed it.
We've got about 3 weeks.
Artists will be paid.
Yes, artists will be paid. Writers will be paid. We've got about 3 weeks left as of this recording, which means when this comes out, there will be about 2 weeks left. It's running until May 8th of 2020. If you are catching this even later and the Kickstarter is over, fear not. The book should be available from our website, both in print and PDF. You should be able to, if you have a friendly local game store that is still open and manage to weather the current economic situation of things, support your local game store and get stuff through them.
Please.
Studio 2 is our distributor, so if you want them to get books in the shop, then those are who they would want to contact. PDFs are also available through our website as well as at DriveThruRPG. So definitely take a look at that. We don't shill the actual products too much because I don't want this to seem like just an ad. You know,
but we are in support of the 4th edition, which is why we're all here.
If you like what we are doing here on this show, you can support us by buying products, because that lets us know that people are enjoying things and want to hear more.
Continue. Other than that, folks, we are done for this episode, and we will talk to you next time. But otherwise, thank you, Josh, for making the time, and it is now time for you to go make your own horrific legend.
Good night.